Hello, everyone. Just wanted to let you know we'll be starting in about 2 minutes. Just want to let some others log on. So this is just a 2-minute warning, and then we'll be starting. Thank you. Okay, hello everyone, and thank you for taking the time to attend today's webinar, Radar ROI, the Maverick radar solution for hyperlocal forecasts. Today's live webinar will be presented by Tad McGuire, Senior Account Executive for Telco Media and Entertainment at the Weather Company, and Richard Stedronsky, Director of Strategic Business Development at EEC Radar, a partner of ours. And before we begin, just a few housekeeping notes. A recording of the webinar will be sent to you after this webinar in the next couple of days. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, just type them into the Q&A window and we'll answer them at the end. And with that, let's get started, Ted.
Real good. Thank you, Therese, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. Really appreciate it. We've had a great relationship at the Weather Company with Enterprise Electronics Corporation over many years, and great success over the past few years as there's been increased awareness and desire to plug into local station radars. And that's a good thing from our standpoint for a number of reasons, not the least of which has to do with digital. And I know we have many of you with broadcast backgrounds and meteorology backgrounds, but we don't want you to forget that although most stations think of this as a purchase for their broadcast, the truth is that with the explosion of data and big data and the use of smartphones is that this is a really, really good investment from a digital standpoint as well. And with an increase in digital dollars running over to mobile and smartphone devices, it's a really, really good and smart decision for stations to be looking into. And the metric that you see there on the screen speaks to that. So the Weather Company, through weather.com app, of which there are over 200 million, and our own white label app, of which there are millions, has access to metrics for the behavior that people have when they're on smartphones. And one thing that jumps out to us is that whenever anyone's using a smartphone app, they are likely to stay on that app, on the radar layer, more than anything else. The forecast, even some of the video content's put up there. So it's a desirable thing, and people are seeking it out. The other thing is that when we do talk with our users, not necessarily the television stations, but the people that are consuming information on smartphones, certainly within the top 10, seeking out severe weather information and live radar is there right at the top. So this is a very, very good thing to be looking into, both for your on-air, but certainly as a play for digital. And certainly as we look at digital, there's a need for television stations to differentiate themselves on that platform. It's very difficult to offer unique content, particularly when you see the explosion of apps that are offering weather content. But the ability for a local station to really differentiate themselves in a place where you can go onto the into the Apple Store, iTunes, or into the Android Store and look at 6,000 or more weather-devoted apps is that the television station meteorologist and presenter have really, really pertinent information to add, both from their own background within the market, but also a really, really good thing for you to be able to do is to differentiate yourself from the information that's coming out of the National Weather Service. And you do that every day in your broadcast. But for the most part, television stations are accessing National Weather Service radars for radar information on their apps, as are all those other competitors out there, both broadcast and those 6 or 10 or 12,000 apps that are sitting out on the various digital stores. But as we know as meteorologists, but I know that we don't have just meteorologists on this call, the network of radars across the United States the National Weather Service operates, while extensive, it has holes in it. And a lot of those holes had to do with the fact that though the radars are located in population centers, it's not always in the center of your DMA. And the further you get away from a radar, the more likely you are to see things or not see things that are going to be of interest to you. So just the characteristics of a radar, the curvature of the Earth, and the fact that the radar beam doesn't curve along that curvature of the Earth, and the fact that when it doesn't curve, it's shooting at the top of a storm rather than at the entirety of the storm, and therefore it's missing out on information. Or in a wintertime setting, when a storm isn't particularly tall, it may be shooting over the top of the storm entirely. So the ability for you to capitalize on this is really, really good, because if you can situate your own local radar into a gap within the network of National Weather Service radars, you're really going to be providing a very high-resolution piece of information that no one can access other than through your app or over your air. And it really makes you much more competitive against the National Weather Service radar. The other thing is that the National Weather Service radars, because they step through in lockstep a volume scan, they're not releasing the data to the various apps, yours or anyone else's, very quickly. It's many times delayed as much as 5 minutes, and even when they're in a ultra-high scan mode, they're still only releasing that data in a 3-minute window or so. And so your ability to access National Weather Service radar in a timely fashion is constrained. And so a local radar can be higher resolution, and it can actually update more frequently, as immediately. And you can also scan the sky more rapidly in a 60-second time frame as opposed to a minute, 2 or 3 minute scan strategy that the National Weather Service employs. So what this allows you to do, both on the air and on your digital app, is essentially drive viewership. We recognize from our research that people are seeking out this information. It is a very, very good local data play when local data has real meaning within the marketplace now, particularly with the explosion of smartphones. The other advantage to having your own local radar is the radar data is your property. So you have the ability to either share it with local emergency agencies or sell it if that is something that the station is interested in doing. And we have seen many cases of television stations essentially entering into partnerships with local National Weather Service offices or deriving fees from those agencies so that they can, the National Weather Service can benefit from the information coming off your radar as well as they're looking to fulfill their watch warning mandate. All right, so that's a little bit of a background as to why you should even really be looking at a local radar play in this day and age. But the next portion of this is going to talk a bit about enterprise and a bit more about the product that we're introducing on this call, the Maverick platform. And for that, I'm going to turn it over to Stead with the EC. Stead, it's all yours.
Thanks, Ted. As you noted, we've been a longtime partner of the weather company, previously WSI, and the reason that our partnership has worked so well, or I should say the reason that the weather company works with us is mainly because of our reputation and our experience in the market space. We are the global leader in commercial weather radar systems. We've been doing this for over 46 years, founded back in 1971. And we manufacture high-quality, low-maintenance weather radar systems. And we work on both EEC radars as well as non-EEC radars around the world. So if you happen to have a non-EEC radar that you're looking to do upgrades to or replacements for, we can help you with those as well as existing EEC radars. And what we're talking about today is our new Maverick system, but I also want to talk about some of our other offerings because we have quite a spectrum of weather radar systems that we can offer. Our traditional Defender series, those are our C and S band radar systems. They run on magnetron and klystron tubes. Those have been around for many, many decades, but still continue to be a viable, reliable system option for many users across the world. Our X-band series, we're focused on two systems there. One is our Ranger system. That was one of the first in the market space back in 2012, 2013. We introduced this solid-state Ranger system, runs on solid-state transmitters. And then today we're talking about the introduction to our new ultra-affordable solution called the Maverick radar, which I'll touch on a little more. And something else to keep in mind is EEC is not only the most experienced commercial vendor of radar systems in the world, but we're also the key innovators, and we kind of drive where the market space is going. And just this year alone, we introduced two new radar product lines, the Maverick system, which we're talking about today, as well as our Endurance system, which we talked about earlier in the year. We had a webinar earlier this year about our solid-state C-band system. And when I talk about solid-state versus magnetron klystron, it's really the details within the transmitter. If you think of magnetron klystron, those are vacuum tubes at a simplistic level that send out a radar pulse out into the atmosphere. It reflects off of some kind of hydrometeor or return and sends that back to the radar, and it's interpreted as rain or hail or sleet or whatever the case may be. For the solid state, which would be the Ranger and the newer Endurance series, all of those transmitter components are solid state. So think of it like your hard drive in a laptop that's got a solid state hard drive. There's no spinning disks or moving parts to it. Everything in the transmitter is solid state. There's no moving parts to it. And in the long run, that does save you some cost in maintenance in terms of replacing consumables. But I want to get back and focus more on what we're talking about today, which is our new Maverick system. We introduced this as an ultra-affordable X-band solution to meet the needs of a number of different markets. Of course, many of you know and have seen information on our Ranger system, which is somewhat similar to Maverick. The Ranger system is a dual polarization, 500 kilowatt solid-state X-band system. So with that system, you get a shorter range out to around 70 miles or so, but you get dual polarization data and the advantages of a solid-state system, which reduces your life cycle maintenance cost. However, as we have deployed Ranger over the past 5-6 years, we found there's still a market there for folks that are looking for something even less expensive and less complex. And that's where Maverick fits in. So we're talking about a very, very complex solution that actually doesn't sacrifice anything in terms of data resolution or range. It's still plugged into the standard suite of EEC equipment for signal processing and for visualization and command and control. You can still get over 4,000 bins of information, so that's going to be perfect for use in mobile and HDTV and 4K. But it's very, very affordable, even more affordable than our Ranger systems. We're talking a fraction of the price of some of those other solutions we just saw on the previous page. And what we've done is we've taken a lot of the advantages of Ranger and turned it into an even more compact solution. We've reduced the antenna size options. Really, your only options there are going to be a 2-foot or 3-foot dish. And yes, that means the beam width's going to be a little bigger, but it's also going to reduce your overall cost and your footprint. And that is going to reduce, like I said, your upfront cost that you pay for the system. What we have done here differently from Ranger is we're using a 100 kilowatt magnetron transmitter instead of the low power solid state ones. So what this allows us to do is get a range that's equivalent to a typical C or S band system, and a Defender or Endurance system, or even an XRAD, which is operating on a klystron or magnetron. So, it is X-band, so there will be some attenuation that you'll have to deal with and should be expected, but you're going to get twice or more the range that you would get with a solid-state Ranger, and again, at a much more affordable price point. And of course, these are always, just like all the radars coming from EEC, turnkey solutions that we can design and configure to meet your exact specifications. May that be different dish sizes, if you want it in a fixed configuration or a mobile one. We can also use these Maverick systems to replace other smaller, older radars that may have been have a small footprint and you want to put something in there without having to increase your infrastructure or tower size or platform size. In terms of the specifications of Maverick, it's very, very similar to our other X-band offerings, just smaller and some of the more compact aspects of it. It operates at 9200 and 9600 megahertz. Like I said, it's going to use our signal processor, which can go up to over 8,000 bins, but typically you're going to operate around 4,000 because once you start getting higher than that, you're really not going to see any difference. We do use a lot of clutter filter algorithms and technology that we use on our other X-band systems to mitigate noise reduction. And you'll see maximum velocity up to 64 meters per second. So you're like I said earlier, you're not sacrificing data quality or range with Maverick, even though you're going with a smaller single polarization solution. Really, the only things you're seeing different from Ranger are you don't have the same solid-state transmitter, and you're not dual polarization. You're just single pole. So what we found in a lot of cases is sometimes folks aren't interested as much in having their own dual pole because they can get that kind of data from the Weather Service. And as Tad noted earlier, one of the advantages of having your own radar is the fact that you can get timely updates. And if you want to get a real advantage out of dual polarization data, you really need to do volumetric scans, and that takes time. So let the Weather Service do the volumetric scans and use the dual pole products from them while you can have rapid updates from your own radar for reflectivity and velocity information. And that's really what people are going to want to see on TV and what they're going to understand when you start talking about more complex products like correlation coefficient or ZDR, things like that. Sometimes you can lose your audience. So in this case, we're removing the dual pole from the equation. That's going to save some money in the cost of the system, but you're still not really going to detract from what you're able to show your audience. And as I noted earlier, we're innovators at EEC, and we continue to roll out new products. In addition to Maverick, earlier this year, we rolled out our solid-state endurance system. Again, this is using low-power solid-state amplifiers, but with our pulse compression technology, you're still getting the equivalent transmitter power of, say, a 350 to 400 kilowatt C-band system. So things like effective range are not being impacted here. You may pay a little more up front for this system because it is solid state, but the life cycle costs, especially if you want a system to run 15 or more years, are going to be drastically reduced because you're not replacing moving parts within the transmitter every so many years, like a magnetron tube or a klystron tube or a power supply or modulator. And just reviewing some of the other product lines we still have out there that are still viable, still strong, and still selling well. Our Defender C-band, this has traditionally been the industry standard. We've sold over 500 of these around the world. Most of the first TV station weather radars that were ever delivered were C-bands from EEC. It's a good balance between cost and performance because you're getting that higher resolution data from C-band. There's a little bit more attenuation than S-band, but not nearly the attenuation you'd see in X-band. So the price point there is kind of a sweet spot for getting good high-resolution data and not sacrificing too much on the attenuation side. And then, of course, our Cadillacs, as we like to call them, our Defender S-band systems. These are, of course, similar to the NexRad type of configuration. These are going to provide the least attenuation out there because you're in the S-band. We provide them in klystron and magnetron configuration, single and dual pole, up to a megawatt of power. And we recently, over the past few years, introduced high-frequency S-band systems, which operate from 3.5 to 3.6 gigahertz here in the U.S. Those have been very, very good systems in the commercial realm because up to just recently, you weren't really allowed to purchase and operate a commercial S-band radar due to potential interference with NexRad and the government. But the FCC has opened up that high-frequency band, and we've been delivering a number of these across the U.S. with great success. So if there's interest in having your own S-band solution, it's now possible through EEC. And then, of course, our Ranger X-band, we still continue to see a lot of traction with this system, mainly in the mobile configuration because it is solid state. It makes it more ideal for that type of setup. It's a fully solid state transmitter, virtually maintenance-free. These are turn it on and set it and forget it type of systems. They're great for filling the gap, like Tad noted earlier, especially in areas where there's a lot of different terrain and you're not able to see all of the information with whatever the NexRad may be providing out there. You're going to see a lot of high-resolution data, the highest you'll see just because it's an X-band, but you have to keep in mind there will be some attenuation, especially when there's extremely strong storms. So tropical locations aren't ideal for Ranger. However, it's a great gap filler and great for mobile applications. And as I said, mobile applications, that's a great segue. We sell a number of these Ranger systems in a mobile configuration every year, primarily in a trailer-based system where we'll put it on a trailer setup with a radome, and then they can hook it up to a truck. A customer can hook it up to a truck and take it wherever they need. And this is also an option for Maverick, for the new Maverick system, just based on its size and specifications. And there's a lot of benefits of having a mobile live radar versus just a fixed system. Like we said, you can fill the gap, and it's going to provide you more accurate information in situ. So you can take these radars to wherever the weather concern of the day or the week is, or set them up in a semi-permanent location where you know there's a gap in coverage and keep them there until you want to tow them or drive them to a different location. And because you're getting that frequently updating data every 60 seconds or so, you're still beating out what you'll get from the Weather Service by a number of minutes. All of the command and control of all of our radars is also available through the Weather Company MAX system, so you can do all of the command and control for a radar or multiple radars from there. And we stream the data back from the radar to the studio, so you get it on air live with no delay. We've seen a lot of success with mobile radars in the field, in the media industry, mainly because you can take your viewers to where the weather is taking place. You can track all this phenomena, and it doesn't just have to be rain or tornadoes or blizzards. It can also be smoke and fire and those type of events. It's also a great marketing tool where you can take these to sporting events or the state fair or some kind of outdoor public event or activity and show it off. We've seen with our experience, they generate a lot of interest. People want to come see and touch the mobile weather radar system. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Tad, who's going to talk about how the data from these live radar systems, may they be fixed or mobile, Defender, Endurance, Ranger, or Maverick, how all of that, when you bring the data into the MAX platform, can really benefit you and your viewers.
Thanks, Ted. And that's exactly right. So Ted touched on the fact that you do the command and control of the radar from directly from the MAX workstation, but that data is flowing live without delay into the MAX system. It's also, for those of us that have a white label version of our mobile app, many stations in the country do so. It's paths immediately into that as well. So you can take advantage of your local radar within our app if you're a customer of it, and we have a means to get it into your app or onto your website as well. Within the MAX platform, we do have a great deal of really robust storm tracking tools, and you get the full benefit of the scientific instrument and the high technology that's available from IEEC, all paths seamlessly into the system. You have the ability with a set of tools that are held within MAX to be able to interactively peer into storms. The screen grab there is of our data scope, the ability to peer through reflectivity data and see the underlying velocity data or similar effects. We have the ability to auto-mosaic these. In fact, it's a seamless configuration within MAX. For those of you that are MAX customers, you know that you can seamlessly integrate up to 5 National Weather Service radars sweeping on the air at any time. The EEC radar has the exact same capability within MAX, so you have the ability to essentially choose from the National Weather Service radar or your own local and have it sweep. The beauty, of course, of MAX, which has always been the case since its conception, is the understanding that from a workflow standpoint, when weather is severe, or even on a calm day, when you're still doing many, many hits and having to post to social and fulfill your broadcast needs, the ability to essentially use one simple, unified user interface is really, really a powerful story. And of course, the EEC Radar drops right into that and works seamlessly with the other capabilities. Ted touched on this note, but we certainly don't want to forget it, and that is that we're talking about, of course, new radars here, but many television stations have a radar today that is could be on its last legs, may actually not be working at all. We do have the ability to help you in those situations as well. We have the ability to evaluate what's in place today and come in perhaps to repair, not necessarily replace the radar, but we didn't want to leave you without making that note. Before we wrap up with questions here, we're just going to go through a couple of examples of EEC radars in action, and I'm going to let Ted handle that, and then I'll handle the questions at the end here.
Thanks, Ted. I just wanted to touch on two really good examples of how having your own live your own live radar can really give you an advantage in the market, but also save lives, which is really what we're focusing on here, is getting information to the public and saving lives. And KLTV in Tyler, Texas is a first great example. They have one of our Ranger systems, actually, and as I'll show on the next slide, they're perfectly located, or not perfectly for their in their regards, between a gap in the Weather Service radars that are located in Dallas, Fort Worth, as well as Shreveport, Louisiana. And so what they did is they purchased a Ranger system from us to kind of fill this gap. A smaller, more affordable system than some of the larger Defender systems, but it was just what they needed to sit in the gap. And what it allowed them to do was provide early warning on the EF3 tornado that took place in Van, Texas a few years ago, and I'll show you a movie of that. They were getting updates almost every 45 seconds from their X-band system of this tornado that tore through the city of Van and unfortunately caused some fatalities. However, they were on air with their live data, their live radar, which had far more resolution both temporally and spatially than the NEXRAD. The NEXRAD was really just a lot of bloxy pixels because the beam was so far away from the two NEXRADs in Fort Worth and Shreveport. And their gap filler, their Ranger gap filler, allowed them to warn the public in advance of the actual Weather Service warning that, hey, we have a tornado on the ground. It's been detected by our radar. Everybody needs to take shelter. And there's no question that that tool allowed them to help save lives, and the fatalities could have been much higher had they not had that, and were working on air as well as with emergency managers to provide that data. This gives you an idea here of the setup there, Van, Texas, and Tyler in the middle of your screen, with the Shreveport radar and the Dallas-Fort Worth radars off to the right and left, respectively. Now, granted, the two NEXRAD radars can go out well over 200 kilometers in range, but the green zone you see there is kind of the sweet spot. Once you get outside this green zone, which is in the roughly 70-mile range or so, you have to keep in mind that your beam is going to start going much higher in the atmosphere and could overshoot key features at the lowest levels. And of course, tornadoes happen at the most lowest levels of the atmosphere. So what they did is they put their Ranger system in here in Tyler to truly fill that gap. What was this high-resolution data that they received from it during this event. And you can see the tornado. I know it's a fast loop, but you can really see the town of Van in the center there and the tornado as it moved right on through. So like I said, they were getting this information. I know this time loop it's only updating 5 minutes on there, but you can see there's more frames. It's not just every 5 minutes. They were actually getting data close to every 45 seconds. So this was critical. Now, granted, there was some attenuation outside and away from the storm, but in this case, this is what they were focused on. It was the tornado. They could do sector scans on it and save lives. So really good example of how a live radar filled a gap and saved lives during a horrible event there in Texas. And another case study in a much bigger market where gap really wasn't the concern as much as just having live, up-to-date information. And this is WLS TV in Chicago. They purchased an S-band radar from us a number of years back and had really outstanding performance during a recent tornado outbreak, multiple EF1s, 2s, and I think there was also an EF3 tornado. And they were doing rapid updates with their S-band, and they used it almost exclusively on air during the event, again, because they were getting that data so much faster than the Weather Service. You know, I'm not trying to poke at the Weather Service. They do an outstanding job. They've got a great network, great team of meteorologists, but they're serving so many customers, and they're doing these volumetric scans. And even in the sales mode, it takes time to do that. And what these folks at KLTV and WLS and many, many, many others have found is having your own live radar makes the difference. In this case, the quote from Jerry Taft, the long-term chief meteorologist there, he said, if you're putting the data on air and it's 4 minutes or so old from the Weather Service with a storm moving 60 miles per hour, you know, you're talking 4 miles away. So you're showing that difference of, okay, here's what NextRad shows, but the tornado is actually 4 miles away from that. And that 4 miles in a populated area could mean a lot of lives at risk. So in this case, they were able to use their live radar data on air and provide up to the minute, up to the second warnings and informations about where these tornadoes were going during the course of the outbreak. So really the key takeaways we want to leave you with before we get into the Q&A is there's a real value here to having your own continuous live radar data. And when you integrate that into the MAX platform, you're going to get all of the essential and unique severe weather tools that you need to provide the coverage and the information and alerting to your viewers to keep them safe and to protect people and protect assets. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Therese, who will open up the Q&A session.
And Therese, before you, I want to make one statement. It's Tad again, because there's both Ted and I have referred to a 60-second update and a 45-second update, and I want to make sure that everyone understands what we mean by that, so there's not a takeaway that says that this is delayed or there's latency in any way. The radar sweeps on in real time, so it's live radar. When we are referring to the update frequency in the KLTV event or the 60-second update that Jerry Taft references, that's the ability for the radar to complete one sweep. And you compare that to the NextRad radar when it's in high rapid scan mode in the sales mode. It's because it has to step up through different levels of the atmosphere. It doesn't do a complete rotation and come back down to the same level and do one full sweep for 3, 4, or 5 minutes. So the advantage here of having the local radar is essentially your ability to update your entire viewing area within a 45 to 60-second sweep. And that's what we mean when we're talking about updates. Just wanted to point that out so there wasn't any confusion. All right?
Okay, great.
Thanks, Tad.
Thanks, Tad and Stead, for that informative presentation. We do have a few questions from the audience, but before we get started, just a friendly reminder that you're all on mute. So if you'd like to ask a question, you can do so via the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. So let me pose the first question to Stead. Can you give us a ballpark price range for the Maverick?
There's some configurations that go into the Maverick, and obviously that will dictate price point. But I think at a very, very conservative number, that's safe to say, is you're talking about a system that installed, delivered, operational is going to be less than $400,000. So again, you know, a fraction of what you'll pay for some of the bigger fixed systems that are out there.
Okay.
And that's, of course, exclusive of the tower or where you're placing it, or if you need to purchase property. But all in from the weather company side and DEC is just under $400,000.
Yep.
Okay, great. Second question, and I know you did talk a little bit about this, Stead, but can you compare and contrast the Maverick to your other X-band radar solutions like Ranger?
Sure. I think the biggest difference is, I mean, you know, we offer a Defender X-band system, but you know, it's really not one that we've seen used in the media market. Really, it's Ranger or Maverick. And I would say to you that the biggest differences of the two is cost, of course, Ranger is going to be a little more expensive because you are dealing with a solid-state dual polarization system, so those extra components increase the cost, the material cost. Maverick is single pole, or Ranger is dual pole. The cost and the range. You're going to get a lot more effective range with a Maverick system because we're using a small 100 kilowatt magnetron versus the lower powered solid state transmitters. So price, obviously going to be less expensive for the Maverick, dual pole versus single pole, and then the effective range, which Maverick is going to get easily twice the effective range as Ranger.
And I think an important add-on to that, Therese, would be to consider the use of these. We have, certainly in the Ranger series, we had a television station that was conscious of the geographic size of their market, and it was a very long, narrow DMA, and they recognized that if they put a single radar in the middle of that they wouldn't necessarily be serving their northern or southern viewers as well. They were also dealing with some blockage issues. So when you look at the price point of these and recognize that a very, very smart play on these, in addition to doing it for gap filling, is to think about how you can take 2 of them or 3 of them and get a much better coverage of the market. We're in active conversations with another DMA where they're in a gap, but they have some blockages because of hillsides and what have you, and so they're looking at essentially doing a configuration where there would be 3 of these placed in concert with each other, and you have the ability to network them together and really do a very effective coverage of your market. Now, because they have NexRads to their west and NexRads to their east, they don't necessarily need dual polarity in all 3 of those. So to keep the cost down, their conversation is progressing along two Mavericks and a Ranger, so essentially 2 single poles and a dual pole. But that's the flexibility that you get when you go with the weather company and EEC. Because we have such a broad range of offerings, you really can mix and match and come up with a very customized solution for what you're trying to do. We've seen pairing of S-band radars with X-band radars that are mobile to essentially extend the ability of a television station to tell its weather story of the day by taking advantage of the mobility of the Ranger product on a truck. So it's a really, really good time to be looking at radars. There's a lot of very, very good reasons to be doing it. And fortunately, because of the history of EEC and the innovation that they've brought to the market, really there's no better time to be looking at them because there's such a broad range and such an ability to choose a configuration that's customized specifically for you in your market.
Okay, and I think someone did have a question on what you just said, Tad, because I think you said long, narrow DMA. The question is, do you not recommend the X-band in South Florida?
I think probably the best way to answer that is to have a conversation with you about what you're trying to solve. If you think about radar, the physics of a radar, an X-band wavelength is very small. It's like a microwave. So so as a result, it tends to be a very, very good solution and an inexpensive solution, but it does suffer from attenuation. So it doesn't have the punch and ability to go through multiple bands within a hurricane setting. That said, an X-band could be a perfect solution in Florida if you were to take advantage of the fact that you have NexRads around you. And so if it is in fact a banding situation, you're using the NexRad for one view angle on it and you're providing the other, or if the gap is big enough, 2 or 3 of the X-bands located in the proper orientation so that essentially one is covering the other, and the overlap gives you a perfect mosaic. So we didn't used to be able to do this. I mean, the cost of computing has come down, and so mosaicing on the fly becomes a much, much easier thing to do and a much more affordable thing to do. So I think the best answer to that question is let's talk to you and find out the problem you're trying to solve, because X-band really could be a perfect solution in Florida given the right set of circumstances. But it might not be. We might want to look at something else there. All right? And we'd be happy to have that conversation with you.
Okay. Well, it seems like we've answered all of the questions today. So like I said earlier, please expect to receive this webinar recording via email within the next couple of days. And feel free to reach out to your sales rep if you have any additional questions. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone for your time and have a lovely rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.